The Smurg by Jessiy, read by Ella Max Mabella. Chapter 13. Moments seemed to fly by as Hermione ran from one end of the room to the other, collecting everything she could ever need. How dare Rosier block her from Grindelwald? She thought of the many different ways that Rosier could have used to detain him, and her face darkened. She and her cohorts would have had to use some seriously dark methods. Grindelwald was known for escaping captivity, on top of being the most powerful wizard in the world, a wizard who had no compunction about using dark magic of his own. The more she thought about things, the more furious she became. It was obvious that Vinda Rosier's letter was nothing more than a severe taunting. Whether done with the sole purpose to lure her out, or really just to give her a warning, she couldn't say. At this point, she really didn't care. Her anger was red hot, and she struggled to keep her magic in check. Merope followed her like a twittering bird, wringing her hands and chattering worriedly before being suddenly and rudely interrupted by a voice from the doorway.
"I'm coming with you,"
Albus said, watching it all unfold from his place just outside Hermione's bedroom door.
"Like hell,"
Hermione mumbled angrily. She might turn the force of her terrible magic on Dumbledore if he thought about pursuing that line of thought. His job was to stay and take care of his family. Hers was to hunt down the son of a bitch who promised the world and didn't deliver. Hermione was in such a state that she refused to acknowledge the fact that Grindelwald was not to blame, hopefully, for the new situation she found herself in. On one hand, she was tempted to drop in one of her hiding spots and arm herself with the unbeatable wand. The temptation was strong, almost too strong, and she fought with her desire to go in with that wand blazing. If she wanted to use it now for this purpose, it was probably not a good sign. She needed to cast out the temptation of it. If she was being honest with herself, she should have snapped it in that tiny boat on the way out of Azkaban. It would have saved her peace of mind. Showing Dumbledore that wand, showing him the cave, would be absolute madness. Of course there was no question that he would follow her. She had no compunctions about that, not at all. She knew he was a wily bastard, and once decided on a course, rarely turned from it.
"I could be of great assistance,"
Dumbledore persisted. "Oh? Now that you have braved your fears and met with the man, you are now willing to go up against him and his movement just to save him or take him down or whatever? I think not, Albus. Get your head out of your arse. There is no way I would let you put yourself into such a situation. What if something happened to you and you died? That would defeat the entire purpose of our vows. Then we would be in the exact same boat as if Merope never married you."
"Not true. If I were to die, which I'm not convinced of, she would still be considered my widow, and the child would still belong to the Dumbledore line."
"Did you miss the part where Merope insisted on him having a father in his life?"
"Many children grow up without fathers."
"And they are more likely to become megalomaniacs that turn into Dark Lords and start massive holocausts just to gain power. I don't need another damn thing to worry about."
"That sounds rather extreme."
"Does it?" Hermione said, oddly calm. She stilled and turned the full force of her attention on him.
"Yes."
"I suppose it would be coming from anyone else. However, from me, it should serve as a warning. You know very well that I am from the future. You should be more concerned about the things that I feel. For there is a very good reason for it. Unless you want to release me from our vow, you will stay here and I will go and recapture Grindelwald."
"Recapture," Albus scoffed. "As if you ever had him in the first place. We both know that you would have never gotten him to Azkaban without his acquaintances."
"You know what, Albus? Here it is, flat out. Stay or go, I don't care. But there is a consequence to both. If you stay, you keep our vow intact. If you go, I will consider the vow dissolved. It is up to you. Do you want me to continue the manhunt, so as to keep you out of the limelight, or will you free me?" Silence pervaded the room. It wasn't like a normal absence of talking. There were no movements, no rustling of clothes or bags being packed. There was simply a void as Albus and Hermione stared at each other. Even Merope was standing nervously off to the side, locked in a wide-eyed stare with the floor. "Well?" Hermione prompted. Dumbledore closed his eyes. A pained look crossed his face. It was obvious that he didn't like the choices available to him. But that was too bad, because for once Hermione had the upper hand, and there was no way she was backing down now. Either way, Tom's fate had already been changed, so much so that even the way he was conceived was different. Her goals were already accomplished. Dumbledore would just have to fall in line or hang himself by his own rope.
"I'll stay,"
he mumbled reluctantly. Hermione smiled and added a little jauntiness to her step. She loved winning, especially against Albus. It just made her feel as if all those years Harry and Ron struggled through trial after trial with her wasn't a waste. It reminded her how ruthless this man could be if left unchecked. Kinder moved from one end of the room to the other, resuming packing when Hermione had paused in her fight of wills against Dumbledore. Hermione once again focused and gathered all of the things that she would need for an extended stay in the frigid German countryside. As Hermione filled the bag, Kinder would pull each article back out of the miracle bag to refold it to her exacting standards before replacing it. Hermione looked on in bemusement, still high on her victory. Albus sulked near the door, not ready to officially concede by leaving them alone, but also not willing to help get Hermione ready for her journey. In record time, Hermione was pressing her lips against Merope's temple, then belly, telling Tom how much she was going to miss him while she was gone. With one last warning glare at Albus, she quit the house and disapparated the moment that she was outside her wall. Germany was under a thick blanket of snow and ice, and the tent city that sprawled impressively beneath the foothill that she apparated to was covered in the same crisp snow. Icicles hung from the eaves of the canvas, and the world was silent. No movement bustled through the camp. In fact, none of the snow had been disturbed at all. That could mean one of two things. Either the camp was hunkered down inside their tents and waiting for the frigid air to warm, even if just marginally, or, Hermione thought with a grimace, they had all left in such a flurry that they didn't even take time to down the tents. She really hoped it wasn't the latter. Hermione elongated her boots into something that greatly resembled skis, taking small branches off the trees around her and turning them into long poles that would help her direct her path. There was no way she would make it to the tent village by nightfall if she had to dig her way out of several feet of snow. Yes, magic could make things easier, but in this case, skiing down would be most expedient. Plus, it was fun. Wind whipped against her face, biting her cheeks and giving them a rosy glow. A smile stretched across her face, breathing in deeply the crisp air of the foothills of the Alps. At the bottom, snow rose in a wave as she turned to come to a stop, spraying the nearest tent. She frowned. Not one tingle of warts hindered her progress. There was only one reasonable conclusion. No one was there. They must have had to leave quickly before the snow hit, abandoning their base camp. But why? Did Gellert come back and announce that he was through? That if they wanted to continue their fight, they would have to do so without him? Or did Vinder head him off before he had a chance to disband his revolutionaries? Hermione kicked one of the icy canvases aside, muttering dire threats to the soon-to-be luckless Vinder Rosier. Damn those Rosiers, always a pain in her ass. First in her own time in the form of a Death Eater, then in this time in the form of a wizarding Mata Hari. Damn them all. She went from tent to tent, leaving none untouched in the hopes of finding out anything that may answer her question as to the reason that the tent city that had been bursting at the seams only a month ago was suddenly a ghost town. It was only until she got to command that she was in luck. Gellert's tent was bursting with his personal effects. Even the warming tombs were still functioning. The smell was hard to forget, and Hermione closed her eyes and breathed deep, enjoying the masculinity that surrounded her. She missed him, and her heart ached with the strength of it. Hermione ran her fingers over the scrolls, books, and robes strewn haphazardly around the room. Plans that never made it to fruition, old drawings of Ermengarde, new ones, correspondence from his field generals on the front lines. It was all exactly the same as she would expect it to be if she were merely waiting for Gellert's return. Why was his tent the only one that hadn't been stripped of possessions? Something in the center of his huge bed caught her eyes, drawing them to a beautifully carved wooden box inlaid with jewels and pearls. She cradled the small box and traced the intricate and skillfully made design. Turning it this way and that, she searched for a way to open the box, only to come up empty. The box seemed solid. Lifting her wand, Hermione cast every spell she could dream of, trying to get the box to reveal its opening. After nearly an hour of casting spell after spell, Hermione dropped the box into a beaded bag. She would have better luck breaking the mysteries in her own home, where resources were much more abundant. Quickly, she finished examining the rest of the tents and found them to be just as empty as all the rest before. Once she made her assessment that there wasn't much else to do, Hermione packed up every single belonging of Grindelwald and directed the contents into a magically expanded bag. She would sift through it all later, at home, or at least somewhere more comfortable. Hermione didn't want to go home just yet, admitting defeat so quickly, so she dropped in on a tiny cottage that had housed Ingrid and Leon, but that was empty too. The hearth was just as cold as the sinking stone in her gut. Rummaging around her bag, she grabbed a new set of Normangard's plans and studied them, hoping that she would draw inspiration from the bold magical lines. Just because she knew this side of the original Normangard didn't mean that was where he would build his new and more powerful prison. As she thought about it, she knew that he wasn't stupid enough to build Normangard where he originally planned. Not with all the information that Hermione had in her head about his regime and movement. The very first thing he would have done was change it all. She would bet anything that you would find all of his workers there at the new site. The only problem was, she had no idea where he would have moved it to. Grimly, she stuffed the plans into her bag and pulled out a map. This map was Muggle, not wizarding, and she wondered absently if she was making a huge mistake by not consulting the magical one instead. After all, he did have ideas about Muggle separation and wizard domination. Still, she felt that pull in her, that sense of deep rightness as she looked at the physical map of Germany. She didn't often make decisions with her gut the way Harry did, but her current situation wasn't typical either. She would find him, and when she did, hell would break loose. Everyone who stood in her way, everyone who threatened the idyllic picture that Grindelwald painted for her, every second they kept him apart from her would only solidify their punishments. The longer it took, the more furious, the more creative she would be. Only Merlin could help Vinda Rosier right now. With a flick of her wand, she shaped a huge ball of snow into a long table and spread the map out on its icy face, weighing down each corner carefully with solid ice sculptures, replicas of all the people she loved in her life. She even created one of Rosier, melting and reforming it into a continuous loop as she continued to think of where Gellert Grindelwald could possibly be. After night fell, Hermione knew that she would have to make camp and internally cringed when she thought of sleeping in a tent. Again. But she kind of wished that she had stayed in the abandoned tent city. At least then she might feel less alone. Then there would be the slight possibility that someone would stumble upon her. Then again, did she really want to leave herself so vulnerable? Heaving a heavy sigh, Hermione pulled out Grindelwald's massive tent and with a flick of her wand had set it up in moments, surrounding the whole in a litany of spells that would warn and hide her in turn. Entering the tent, Hermione was overwhelmed with her smell. It pervaded the very canvas that enclosed the space, and she ached. She yearned for Gellert and their bantering and seduction. His attention, the way he looked at her as if she were the most riveting conundrum. She desperately wanted him to just appear like he usually did, finding her in the most absurd places. Smiling, she approached the bed and smoothed her hands over the warm, luxurious blankets, admiring the plush feel of them. For a moment, she could imagine what it would be like being in his bed, with him. Her skin tingled as she imagined where he would run his fingers. A call of desire began winding in her core. His lips, covered in a day's growth of stubble, would rasp against her neck, tickling her, making her melt. Hermione closed her eyes, breath hitching in her throat. She had almost had him. He was finally willing to admit that what he was doing wasn't right, or at least he wasn't willing to continue on. That she was more important to him than the cause. He had even approached Dumbledore for the first time in countless years. The bitterness of losing him now, when she was so close to stopping this madness, was a bitter pill to swallow. For once, she had allowed herself the luxury of wanting him, of letting herself fall. For it all to be snatched away at the very last moment by Vinda Rosier, of all people. Fury burned like white-hot steel through her, and the longer she thought about things, the more and the more furious she became. She had been so close. So fucking close. She could almost taste it. Rosier would pay. A nearly unidentifiable sound scratched at the fabric of the tent, making Hermione tense up immediately. Nothing should be able to touch the tent. Not a stray tree branch, not a wild animal, and certainly not one of her enemies. "Herminum Revelio," Hermione whispered, watching as a ghostly spectre settled around a prone form on the frozen ground, inches from the exterior of Grindelwald's tent. Hermione thrust back the tent flaps and was mid-cast when she saw who had breached the wards. Young Leon lay broken and battered on his stomach, tear tracks cutting through the large splashes of blood that coated his face. "Leon!" Hermione murmured in alarm, running to the boy and flipping him over so that he lay face up. He whispered before losing consciousness. Hermione flicked her wand, lifting the boy, and directed him to float along behind her, bringing him into the tent. She laid him down on the bed and ran diagnostic after diagnostic, hoping and praying that whatever reason he was in that state wasn't fatal. She may not have approved of Grindelwald using him and his sister as a means to convert Hermione to his cause, but she didn't dislike the boy. In fact, she had felt protective over him. He was a Muggle-born, like her. The only difference between them was the singular fact that she had wonderful parents and Leon did not. She rummaged around in her bag and pulled out potions after potion. Blood replenisher, pain reducer, Scaligro, and Dittany. Slipping one arm under his head, she coaxed each potion in his mouth, drop by drop. He was still unconscious when she finished, and she looked on with worry, knowing that to watch him would be like watching water boil. Hermione turned away and drew the maps back out of her bag, combing them for any ideas where Grindelwald could be. Closing her eyes, she tried to remember everything Binns had taught them about Grindelwald's movement.
It wasn't until 25 when his first major appearance occurred, and for the first time was captured by the Makusa in the wake of a failed attempt to capture a matured Obscuria.
Binns droned from the high podium in the front of the room.
Although it wasn't the first time he was under our protection, it was the first time he was held in a high-security prison. After that, his tactics changed. He became single-minded in his endeavor to become the king of the magical community, and by extension the Muggle as well. Plans were made for a palace to be built, but he decided to subjugate the world first, and the plans were set aside. Presumably for a later date, had Grindelwald not fallen 20 years later.
"How come he was unable to have it built in those 20 years? Padma Patil, the Ravenclaw twin, asked, shocking Professor Binns right out of his monologue.
Well, Miss Patil, his architects and workers were busy building the most secure prison the world had ever seen. I doubt he wanted to slow down that project. It was his only means to capture the wizards in the world who were powerful enough to make a move against him. He probably reasoned it was more important to solidify his regime than it was to recreate Versailles.
But where would he build such a place? Hermione had asked, riveted. It wasn't like Germany was central enough to the rest of the wizarding community. He might as well build a castle and rule out of Siberia.
Our best information indicated that he was planning to build a castle on the ley lines. They converge in only 3 places: America, Japan, and England.
Japan, though sympathetic to his goals,
was severely against letting foreigners in their country. They didn't want to dilute their heritage by allowing foreigners free access. So his 2 remaining choices were England and America. Both had significant pitfalls. America was also a bit isolated from all the European wizards, and England was protected by the mere presence of the esteemed Albus Dumbledore, a rival he dared not taunt.
Hermione looked around Grindelwald's tent, taking measure of the man she knew, compared to the monster they had learned about in History of Magic. Would he be foolish enough to change the building site of Ermengarde from Germany to England? Somehow she didn't think so. Not only was Dumbledore there, but Hermione was also there as well. Grindelwald was too smart to make such a devastating mistake. But if not England, then where? Leon groaned from his bed, and Hermione hurried over to check on him, lightly pressing her cool hands against his brow.
"Hermione,"
he whispered,
"I'm here." "Where is Gellert?"
"I don't know."
"But you are here, in his tent."
"Yes, well, I sort of took it over." Leon weakly snickered.
You couldn't have taken it if he didn't intend for you to. The only reason I can get here is that he allowed me through the walls.
He has been kidnapped by that Rosier woman, and when I arrived at the tent city, it was deserted and empty, all except for Gellert's tent.
Gellert was way too powerful for Winder to overtake.
What do you think happened?
Not one. Who?
Okay, then who?
There has only ever been one other than you, that is.
You mean the other person he was afraid of?
Albus Dumbledore.
That is impossible, Hermione said firmly, frowning, and despite her vehement denial, began running through the final day before she left on the merry chase. The letter stating that Grindelwald had been captured. Dumbledore was there in her house. Why hadn't he been at the school? Why was he so gung-ho about finally picking up the mantle to hunt the Dark Wizard? Fucking Dumbledore. Again. How many times would she be fooled by the man before she finally learned her lesson? She hadn't even tried to get in touch with Gellert before she left. She just ran off, pell-mell, infuriated by Winder Rosier's apparent intrusion just when Hermione thought she had won. That wasn't like her. It was Harry not thinking first. Hermione nodded to herself. This time, she would go slowly, meticulously plan out each and every move, and when she returned, whoever was the mastermind behind this debacle, Dumbledore or Rosier, would feel her wrath. Cold realization stopped her in her furious tracks. Dumbledore had been willing to come, yes, but from the mouth of both Dumbledore and Gellert, they met, and terms of surrender were laid out. Why would Dumbledore bother to do this? Suspicion colored her assessment of the boy on the bed.
How come you came here? Where is Ingrid?
Hermione asked gently.
I went to your house, but it was empty. Ingrid is staying with some friends. I overheard something and I wanted to tell Gellert.
What did you want to tell him?
The Muggles. A war broke out and they were killing each other by the thousands.
What were won? Hermione murmured. They were quiet for several minutes, only their breathing disturbing the silence. Where is everyone else from the tent city?
How would I know?
Leon asked, bemused. How did you get like this? She gestured to his bruised face.
Got caught up in a skirmish.
He looked away and Hermione narrowed her eyes.
I could really use a drink,
Leon said, licking his lips nervously. Without taking her eyes off the boy, Hermione conjured a cup and filled it with cold water, leaning into him to help him sip.
Could I have tea?
He asked. Which is best for healing body? There was no way she was taking her eyes off of him for a single minute.
This isn't what Ingrid says,
he said with a lopsided smile. His smile was broadening and changing. Hair that was receding, growing coarse and darkening. Leon was not Leon, but a poorly-juiced version. Her wand was out and at the newly unveiled wizard's neck within moments. We can do this the easy way or the fun way, Hermione said with narrowed eyes and furiously pinched lips. This isn't what it looks like, Magnus Prince said. Really? Hermione asked dangerously. Then explains it, and if I were you, I would start talking fast. I hate him, Prince said passionately, spittle flying from his mouth. I have never wanted anything in my life so badly as I wanted to marry you. He took you from me. Every chance of my possible happiness in ruins, because he was charming and attentive and dangerous. I can be dangerous too. I didn't have feelings for you, that is why I rejected you, Hermione said bluntly. But in time that would have changed. I wanted him to feel my pain. I wanted to take away something he wanted more than his own life. It wasn't even hard to find his followers. All I had to do was drop hints in the ears of the right people, and I was invited into their midst. Hours later, I brought in the Aurors, and they emptied out everything. And then the letter. But I didn't send it until I knew Dumbledore was going to be at your home. He would give the fear legitimacy and urgency. He pushed off the bed and stood to his full height, towering over Hermione, seemingly uncaring that she held a wand to his throat. You used Albus Dumbledore to get back at me for rejecting your proposal, she asked incredulously. It wasn't a fake letter, you know. Winder Rosier was only happy to write it. She knows you will ruin their movement. And Leon, what did you do to him? The boy is safe at the manor. I am not a monster, you know. Hermione gritted her teeth, obviously disagreeing.
You don't have to worry about Grindelwald now. He's going to pay for his crimes, and you will be free to be Lady Prince, my wife.
You are crazy, Hermione growled. Did you really think doing this would endear me to your suit? His hand wrapped around her wrist that clenched her wand so tightly. She tried to yank her arm. Free, tried to cast a stunner, but he was faster. A hole burned through the canvas of the tent behind his head. He yanked her wand out of her, and her magic reacted violently, sparks leaping from curl to curl, looking so much like a halo of electricity framing her head. He jerked her forward into his chest, only wincing as the electric sparks whipped his face.
There are ways, he said menacingly, ways to keep you. You will come to accept me, adore me, and realize that I'm doing this for us, for our happiness. Let me go,
Hermione said furiously, kicking him in the shin. He clenched his teeth and pushed her backward until she was pressed against the wooden armoire, chest to toes.
Never,
he whispered vehemently. From his inner jacket he pulled out a knife. A cursed knife, a knife that once left a scar on her neck. The Blacks had owned it in their time, but maybe they were related to the princes, and when Eileen was disinherited, the family fortunes went to others. Regardless of the house, Hermione eyed that knife with no small amount of hate.
It doesn't take much to marry using blood rites.
I do not consent, Hermione growled, renewing her struggles against him. Magically, she was a force to be reckoned with, but disarmed, she was still a small woman and he was a much larger man.
Lucky for me, you don't need to,
Prince said, drawing a cut on her wrist before moving to his own.
And lucky for me.
A smooth, velvet voice purred behind Prince, a new wand held at his throat.
I wasn't the only lucky bastard to have heard that entire confession.
Hermione looked up, wide-eyed, relieved, and pleased to see Gellert whole and hearty. Dark and dangerous.
Drop the knife,
Gellert said. With a twist of lips, Prince sliced his wrist, pressing his open flesh to hers with a yell of triumph. His happiness so turned into confusion as there was no great light of bonding, no physical manifestation of their marriage. Auras took over from there and bound Prince, pulling him away from Hermione. Hermione marveled at the unblemished wrist that had been cut open moments ago, before looking up into the face of Albus Dumbledore, who was sweating profusely, gripping his wand still pointed at the place where Hermione's wrist was moments ago.
I would never hear the end of it from Merope if I let you get married without her being in attendance,
Dumbledore said, with a twinkle in his eye. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Smurg by Jessiy, read by Ella Max Mabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, AO3, Instagram, or Tumblr.